We're very lucky to be joined by three very knowledgeable speakers. Jenny Brown, here on my left, is the headmistress of City of London School for Girls. They have now since, how long? 2 years? So since 2021, they've also had a co-ed junior school, which takes children in from 7+, and that's at Gray's Inn, but they then go to being a single-sex all-girls school at 11+, and a single-sex all-boys school also at 11+. We've got Adam Pettitt here, who's the head at Highgate School. They're a senior school from 11 to 18 co-ed, and they also have an attached pre-prep and junior school. So you could join Highgate as a 4-year-old and go all the way through to 18. And then we've got Grace Moody-Stuart, who's the director of our consultants at the Good Schools Guide. She's been writing about and reviewing and advising families on schools in London and around for more than 20 years. So a wealth of experience here between the three of them, and there will be time at the end for you to ask questions of the panel as well. I suppose the reason we're all here today is because state and independent sector schools in London are fiercely competitive. Everybody knows that, and it feels like every year it gets more and more so. At senior level, in particular, at 11+, there are often more than 10, 11, 12 applications per place. Some of the North London grammar schools, you'll discover, have more than 3,000 applications for 100 places. So these places are hard fought for, and we're going to help you this morning understand how to choose the school and how to get that place. What do you think is different about educating a child in London? Why are these places so difficult to come by? And are London schools offering something different to parents? Jenny?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Yes, our London school's offering something different. Well, as I got up this morning and sort of sidled past people preparing for the Lord Mayor's show, and then those sort of getting ready to go to the remembrance, whatever that is, ceremony, and then of course, all sorts of excitements elsewhere. I just did think, gosh, this is what London is. This is part of what makes, education in London part of the excitement. All the capital, all the cultural and indeed business excitement of the capital is part of what educating in London, I think, is. And the energy that is embodied there is somehow part of what I think informs quite a lot of our schools. And it is also hugely a place. I mean, the city, of course, for many years has been a refuge for people coming in. And I think there is something, and I'm sure Adam would agree here too, that, it does mean that you're not going to get a particularly local feel, I think, in a London school. You're going to get all the wealth and breadth of, really different people, different contexts, different starting points, different areas. So I think that is probably something that is a flavour of certainly both our schools and many London schools. And they're unashamedly scholarly and intellectual too.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Whoa, can you hear me? Is that working? I'm getting some feedback. Okay, let's keep going. London, 9 million people, so it's. Jenny's very much better at this than I am. Okay, 9 million people, so therefore what Jenny says about the idea that nothing's very local, I mean, even in state schools, that defining where your catchment area becomes really, really awkward. I mean, one year it's one street, the next year it's the next street. So it creates that. I mean, I think if you look at New York or other cities where we've got lots and lots of people living there wanting to go to schools, it becomes very frenzied. And geography tends to determine the way that people behave. So over the time I spent in North London, I've come to believe that the geography and the school system renders parents momentarily mad and obsessive about things which they shouldn't be obsessive about. Because what I understand is there are about 5,000 people looking for places at 11+ in London, and there are about 5,000 places. So it really works every single year, and everybody always finds a place. But if you've got a child aged 10 and you're looking at the London thing, you think that it's basically Armageddon. You're never going to find a place for your child, or you may be one of the lucky ones who, rather like Charlie in the Charlie and Chocolate Factory, gets that ticket, and so you have to buy hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bars of chocolate. And it really isn't like that, to my mind. And so I spend quite a lot of time saying, apparently we're really oversubscribed. This is not quite true, because everybody who applies to Highgate has applied to 5 or 6 or 7 other schools. And while you may be feeling really nervous whether there will be a place for you or not, I sit there terrified that I've over-offered. And, although Ryanair is a good way to run airlines, it's a really bad way to run schools, because if you offer too many places, you don't have enough. So I sit there totally terrified. But every single year it works. So I think if you're the kind of person who's sitting in a restaurant and you can't make up your mind about which food to choose, and when the waiter finally requires you to do, you spend the rest of the meal agonizing over whether you've got meal envy or not and got the worst deal. If you're that kind of person, then you should shut up and go away and leave all normal parents just to relax into the fact that it's probably going to be fine. So I think we over-dramatize quite how difficult it is. I just think that big cities have lots of schools with lots of people able to choose many different schools. And so it's in the nature of Singapore, Hong Kong, probably London and others. And I just don't think we recognize that enough. When I was in Norwich, there was one boys' school and one girls' school. And we had about 80 applicants for 70 places. And it was just working out which were the 10 we didn't take. And that was terrible for those 10. But most of the time we spent worrying about whether there were enough people, which produced a different kind of worry for the head.
Grace, with your overview of schools both in London and outside London, do you think there is something that gives London an unusual sense of sort of freneticism, I guess, as Adam says?
I think freneticism is a good adjective, but I would also say that there is a lot of anxiety centered around what Adam's alluded to, this sense that you might be missing out on the best school. And people confuse the best school with the most academic school normally. And London has got some very academic schools, all of which are fantastic, but they're not necessarily the best school for your child. So I think that what Adam was referring to is this sort of anxiety that parents have, that they want to do the best for the child, and that means getting to them to that most famous, most academic, most high-flying school that sends hundreds of children to top universities in the States and in the UK. You just have to step back, because actually your child may well go to those top universities from a different kind of school, and actually if they did get squeezed into that school through lots and lots of tutoring, that top school that you see as a top school, they may well fall flat on their faces because they are just not happy and they're not thriving. So I think the thing to remember in London, which is it's more difficult to remember in London than it is outside London, is that you've got to keep your eye on what is the best fit for your child. Yes, apply to 5 different schools, as Adam said, that you actually have to do that. You have to, you can't end up just applying to one school, but be realistic and be aspirational for sure, but be realistic and have some backups.
Thank you. But I would also just say this, and I'm saying this partly as a head who says in front of all their year 12s, when they start their sixth form experience, this brilliant line, actually, I think it was, I think her name's Cantor, brilliant Harvard professor, talks about leadership. And the first rule is show up. And I think, people sort of agonize about, this is going to be too competitive, or so-and-so number, which we don't ever obviously share how many applicants we get for each place, because I think it is genuinely unhelpful, because it is about, there's so many things that can help to get your daughter, in this case, to CLSG. But the first absolute prerequisite is the showing up, is not taking her or that family out of the game. So I think it is not being too alarmed by it, but just having a go is also really important.
That's really reassuring, I hope. Thank you. Especially actually that idea that there are the same number of secondary school places as there are children, which I think is something that is very easy to forget. Jenny, you've worked in a number of very academic girls' day schools, probably many of which these parents are considering today. Adam, Highgate's actually your first London school, albeit you've been there almost 20 years, but previously you were at boarding schools outside London. How do parents choose then? You've got 10 or 15 or 20 really big names in London. You've got tube networks that will zip your child from A to B. It's to get to the school gate. And I suppose, Jenny, probably a lot of your families are coming from different compass directions. Adam, you're probably more naturally in a North London sort of constituency. But how do you choose those 4 or 5, as Grace suggests? How do you narrow it down?
Well, you do things like this, so congratulations. Well done. First thing is to do some research and do it in a kind of leisurely. I love Adam's beautiful Arcadian vision. We're going to make this so smooth for you this year. The madness will stop now. But I think, and it is, and I'm saying this as very much as a parent. They are now in their 20s, but I still never find myself saying, gosh, I wish I could go back to when they were in year 6. Do that all over again. I also worked in Highgate, by the way. I feel I have done a wonderful tour of some of the lovely, great schools, as you say. I hope you're considering many of them. And I know, and indeed, I think there are things to say, and I am going to say this. You'd expect me to, I suppose, as the head of a girls' school. But we had 2 wonderful children who were both very happy where they were. But we moved one of them out to a girls' school, not because she wasn't thriving there. She was in a co-ed junior school, but because we thought she'd really love the space, and it was quite new to taking to being all fully co-ed at that point. This particular school, and we thought she'd thrive more probably, and enjoy being in a more a school which was absolutely established for girls' education, and thus it proved. They both had the most amazing. And my son, we kept in the co-ed environment, and he also thrived there. But I always say this, and I always mean this, and I know Adam's basically said it as well, that the most important thing, as that wonderful banner says, it's the goodness of the school is not really dependent on its gender makeup. And I think the fit, I do think, I'm going to, listen to your child. I personally am not a fan. This makes me sound, I know, antediluvian, really old-fashioned, but I wouldn't suggest that you let the 10-year-old make the decision exactly, but you might want to cause them to have the right thought. But I do think it's about listening to them and them being sort of included in how they're feeling about it. I think that is important. Going along, and absolutely, the 2 things I would say, these are my 2 very specific tips. If you're only able to go to an open day where, they've polished the leaves and people aren't, it's not sort of every day, I would really try and get into an everyday situation and try and get into lessons that are every day, because I think that's really, really illuminating. And you can see immediately, and obviously also you then get to talk to a lot of pupils, not just the pupils who are sort of on show, as it were. 1. And 2, if you're thinking about, again, co-ed, I think this is a really good question to ask, actually, of any school. But, how much money per head goes on girls in co-ed institutions compared to boys? How much space do they have? What are the lunch arrangements? What's the library doing? Is that full of the right, texts that are good for girls as well as boys? So I think it's just making sure that you are, that you're really aware of how a school is going to meet your individual child's needs, because that is what, in the end, and again, this feels like a dramatic statement, but I really firmly believe, in the end, that's what you're paying for your individual, wonderful, unique, beautiful human to be known. And that's what, really, frankly, great London independent schools will do. They will get to know your child as an individual.
I don't want to be in an echo chamber, so I'm going to try and say something deliberately different from Jenny. In one way, it's going to be easier because I don't run a girls' school. But I think I'd start off with cost. I think I would think a family budget. I would think about whether that means bursaries, where obviously there's information elsewhere. And I would... There are differences in fees across different schools. And I would think what the impact of having to put that amount of fees from income is going to be on the way you lead your lives. How busy is that going to make you? And how much time will you have to travel? I think I then think about geography and commuting, and bear in mind the sort of the 10 journeys a week, 35 weeks a year, the 7 years, and I think about that. And while you can travel a long way on tubes, if it's not the tradition of that school to do so, your children's friendship group might be a long way away, which is another set of commuting for going to parties and play dates and stuff like that. So I think I'd do that. I would then relax into my Arcadian hot bath and say that all the schools I compete with, and I know in North London, are really, really good. I don't get many transfers from other schools. I meet lots of young people on conferences or things that we're running, and I just come away with thinking what nice young people they are. So whether they're Channing, whether they're South Hampstead, whether they're City of London School for Girls or Boys or UCS, I just come away, or HABS, I get the impression that those are really well-run schools with children who are delightful, and the reason that they're delightful is because their parents love them very much or their carers love them very much. And so the thing that tends to give long-term stability and happiness to adults is the experience they've had at the home. Quality of teaching, stability of the family unit are the most important things. School type is really, really relatively unimportant. And then so relaxing into the fact that my child is probably going to be, because schools are full of people, adults telling you what to do, and desks, and they're all very similar in respects. The differences are really quite minor, I think, in terms of what the actual teaching and the pedagogy. I mean, obviously, Highgate School is the best school in the cosmos, I'm going to say that, but I just do wonder whether if the same child had gone to another school, whether they would actually agree with me. And I think then I would say, take yourself as parents and say, how does this school appear to deal with parents and the interface? Because you are the ones who are going to have the intermittent dealings with the school. The child is going to be there all the time, and they will become part and parcel of it. They won't know any different. But you'll need to know that it feels right for you. Now, all of our schools would not want you to feel you had to be a particular kind of family at all. We'd all like to think that people who'd not thought of our school or who were different from other people there would be coming in and maybe adding to the diversity. You certainly don't need to have been at a private school to send your children to a private school, all those kind of things. But I just think that's your tummy feeling and saying, I've heard the head talk. I could really imagine dealing with something difficult, a case of bullying or the fact that I don't want them to do this A-level or whatever it is, something's gone wrong. But if you're sitting there thinking, I just do not understand why they're making decisions about the way they do pastoral care, or they've talked about something else rather first, then you perhaps get a sense that the way the school is ordered may just not be as good as the way a school's ordered for the way that you run your family. And I'd listen to that. And I absolutely agree with Jenny that asking 10-year-olds what they think is you obviously need to give them, you need to be clear as a family about how much choice they've got, but they will be making decisions on September and where their friends are going, because that's the nature of what they're thinking about, or whether the food was good on a particular day. They won't be thinking about the 7 years, because how can they? Because they can't remember something that was 7 years ago. So those would be the things I would be saying. And I'm not being flippant about school choice. I'm just saying that an awful lot of people in the world have no school choice and bring up very happy children, and you've just got this choice that you're going to have to navigate because you live in a big city, and just approach it rationally. But that would be my sequencing, I think. And if none of those things matter, then probably flip a coin.
Grace, have you got anything to add?
Not much, because I agree with pretty much everything both these splendid heads have been saying. But I do think that these are an example of what you're looking at when you're looking at a school. The head is critical. That doesn't mean that one head will be good and one head will be bad, but you will want to have a sense of what their values are, how they communicate, what they're like with you, your children, and that's very important. And I think the second thing I'd say is that don't confuse what's right for your child with what's right for you. Just know your child and leave all your kind of personality behind when you're making the decision. But the process itself really helps. I mean, in applying for those 5 schools, they'll probably end up at the right one.
We've mentioned by name quite a lot of independent schools, and what you'll know from talking to schools and talking to people is that North London is full of fantastic state schools, both selective grammar schools and also comprehensive schools. We all know that VAT may be coming down the tracks. We've read in the newspapers about top universities looking possibly preferably at students coming out of the maintained sector. how do parents bake those conversations into their decisions? I mean, Adam, you mentioned budget and, what's family life going to look like if you're paying fees? And we do have a talk later on about bursaries, and we can explore that in more depth then. But are independent schools in London now having to fight harder, do you think, to attract those families who are perhaps thinking about Oxbridge and thinking about fee increases and whether in the longer term this is affordable?
Shall I go first, just to change the...
Go for it.
It's actually a bit easier to go second, because then you can work out. Going to the second question first about, you said that universities are looking at young people coming from state sector. I think actually what universities are trying to do is to make sure that children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and that's where all the effort has been going in, and that's brilliant, and it's entirely what it should be, which means that we are beginning to be much more realistic, I think, about the quality of universities beyond Oxbridge, and that how lucky we are in this nation to have so many high-performing universities which not only do fantastic research, but also have really good teaching. And so I've really seen a keen interest amongst our families and our young people of really interrogating what it means to be at a particular university and the employability factor. And I found that actually the current generation, unlike their parents, are not buying into Oxbridge automatically being the best outcome, because they're not necessarily quite as fast at the moment off the mark in terms of the employability. So you'll find some universities which are so focused on what you will get at the end of it and thinking from day one how you find out about what career you want to do and how to get those contacts. That's brilliant. I spent a lot of time to trying to prick the bubble of Oxbridge in our young people, because it does a very specific thing for a certain number of people, but it's a tiny, tiny number of people, and we really shouldn't be focusing everything on it. I get it as a proxy for how good your school is, but I try to put it to one side. So I haven't particularly experienced our students finding discrimination against them. I don't think that exists. I think they just have to be more sensible about the choices they're making, rather as you do, that they need to make sure that they're pricing into their 5 choices, going to have 5, some which has not got such a high tariff. So the trouble is there is a snobbery amongst young people saying, if they don't ask for 2 A stars, I'm not going there. And they say, well, actually, but what happens if you don't get 2 A stars? And they say, well, I'll think about that afterwards. So thank goodness clearing exists, so they can get that. But, so that, back to the VAT, we don't know what it's going to be like. We do know, I think, that the Labour government is very likely to be in power. We do think that they will want to bring in some kind of charge. I don't think they call it VAT. So I think the fees there will be more to pay by independent schools. I think schools are looking at a number of things, whether they increase their own income, whether they pass on the costs, whether they cut things that they would otherwise have been doing, and whether they make certain things chargeable. So all of those things I think will be there. I think it's just really sensible if you're looking ahead to say, what would it mean to me if I did have to pay 20% more? I don't think it will be 20%. I think it's just, what would that be? And just think about that in the long term and then consider it, because it will definitely be something that for at least 5 years, and it's going to be really difficult for anybody to retreat from VAT because it's a vote winner. So I think that's what you'll need to be thinking about. For schools like ours, we're doing quite a lot of consultation. We're trying to find out from parents where the pain needs to sit, what do they not want to go without, and what would they be reasonably willing to give up. But conscious that it is a building, and if you keep taking all the bricks out, then the building looks very different or may not be standing. But I think that I don't think there's anything very much more sensible to say other than prepare yourself for the worst.
That's a really joyful moment to leap in, isn't it? I mean, I do agree. I think in some ways, I mean, if I can be the Pollyanna bit here, then in some ways it may be good for future parents in the sense that, I know this is counterintuitive, but it is going to make every independent school, become a cost-cutting, have a really cost-cutting focus in a way that perhaps they haven't. I mean, it's well known over perhaps recent decades. So, there will be, as Adam's just described, scrutinising of costs in a slightly different way. So there is that little tiny silver lining there. I mean, in terms of the widening access at Oxbridge, which is clearly a thing and is clearly, philosophically to be welcomed. I think one direct impact for us is that the increase in pupils doing what we call dual track, which essentially is applying to a number of US schools at that point. And that I'm sure, and again, I'm sure it's the same at Highgate, there has been a massive increase in as I say, pupils applying to the States, which is wonderful. And I was in New York actually over half term, having a lovely alumni gathering with loads of current undergraduates and in fact recent graduates who are now settled on the East Coast. And it's wonderful in many ways because of course they are genuinely global and they're genuinely pioneering, exciting, and that's fantastic. In terms of, at the actual point of application, to be honest, it's a complete nightmare because many of them are trying to do two very different things. One is to convince Oxbridge that they are narrow and deep and scholarly, and that's what they care about, and at the same time to convince 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 American schools that they are incredibly rounded, that they are, they are very different application processes and approaches and philosophies. I'm going to share this just because it's a pearl. I'm not sure it's answering a question, but I love it. The dean at Princeton, who I recently had lunch with, said to me that we are as interested in determining in their application process what students will be saying to each other at midnight in the dorms as what they might be saying in a lecture hall. Whereas absolutely, Oxford and Cambridge certainly are very focused. They will say, they want people who are, they're looking for people who are inhabiting their subject. So, absolutely, as Adam says, of course, we are blessed with a number of really good universities in this country. And as with schools, there's no one. But I think there's no one right place. There's a number of really good places. But I think it is worth just knowing that the places are not just in the UK, they are also now global, international.
Can I just ask quickly, because I think we want to open this up to the floor and hear your questions, but Grace, on that.
I have very little to add. I just wanted to hear what you both had to say. Frankly, we're all really watching this space very carefully. It is concerning. I think VAT, whatever it might be called on school fees, is going to have a huge impact, perhaps not on Highgate and City, but on many schools around the country. So I was really interested to hear what you both had to say. Thank you.
And do you think that, because I know that as a guide, we are, we cover 364 schools, I think, across London. Do you think that parents are increasingly going to be looking at selective sixth forms, for example, as an alternative to going independent in those last 2 years?
It's already happening. Parents will choose perhaps independent for a while, but they'll choose state sixth form, or they'll choose independent for junior, but choose state secondaries. That's already happening.
Yeah, we're seeing that because we have a 4+, 7+, 11+, and 16+ entry. We are seeing people choose the bit of the school which suits them best. So when they're doing their financial planning, they think, a lot of people do go all the way through, but they don't necessarily enter the school thinking they're going to change, but they do. And we don't provide preparation for tests. We're very sympathetic to the fact, and we talk to all the parents at the various different points before the doors open in other schools to make sure they know, because at least if you've applied, as Jenny said earlier, if you don't apply, you're not going to get a place. And we're very open about what would be the financial implications, and when people sometimes ask, could we be guaranteed to come back in the sixth form if we go now, we have those conversations with the people, and I think there will be more, as it were, choosing what your family needs at a particular point. And I think that's a good thing, and it's one of the coping mechanisms that schools will have, because we certainly are turning down a lot of people at every point who would like to come to us, so maybe there will be people who come back in that way.
Thank you. I think I'd really like to hear what, if there are any questions from the floor, what you think or what you'd like to know more about.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Very helpful, very informative, and enlightening. I have one question about girls' school and also co-school school. I know that for each kind of school, I have pros and cons. For girls' school, I know that, of course, it has its advantage. But my question is, what a girls' school you think are the most important things that, as a headmaster, you need to take care of to minimize the cons, so as to make sure that when girls leave school, go into society, they can co-work well with the boys.
So the pros and cons of co-ed and girls' schools and how you mitigate for those cons.
Let's focus on the cons.
Okay.
So how a girls' school can handle those cons, to minimize those cons, to make sure that girls can thrive in the girls' school. Not in girls' school, but after they leave the school, after they go into society.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. It's the question, isn't it? If you're looking at girls' schools, we recently did some surveying of our parents to see where they were really on the gender thing. By a huge majority, they didn't actually choose us because we were a girls' school. So that was first really interesting and illuminating fact. They chose us centrally because of results and culture. So that's what was. Now, obviously, you might say that being a single sex determines the culture in some ways, but I don't actually think it does. To address your question, and it's a really, really important question. What does any single sex school do to ensure that pupils are properly readied for the world? Well, the first thing they do, I mean, we're incredibly fortunate, is you get up close and personal with lots of schools around you. Actually, if you happen to have a very, very close brother school, as we do, you make sure that an awful lot of the learning is co-ed. And a lot of the beyond the, a lot of the co-curricular opportunities are co-ed, and you mean that, and that's right from the start, from year 7 upwards. But that they also enjoy, of course, all the space and and again, perhaps some of the, the absolutely uninhibited opportunities for leadership, which sometimes girls don't feel. But I think it's a really, really important question. I think by a long measure, it is really, really important that the school is good and understands individual children rather than is, thinking it's just doing something by one gender, because that's never going to work. Yeah.
I see absolutely no evidence of any girl having gone to a girls' school not being just as well prepared to cope with adult life. I don't actually think that. I would say that I would become sort of the firmest advocate for girls' education if it was all about. I mean, I think it's almost the wrong question. It seems to me that the difference between being in a single-sex school and being in a co-ed school is actually on the experience at school than afterwards. All the people I've met, I mean, some of you presumably, have been to single-sex schools, and I've never been able to detect at university or later on any difference in the ability to cope with the difficulties that young people face. And I think most of this is the ability to cope with relationships, the ability to cope with sexism, sexual violence, the ability to know that you're not going to be pushed around by people, to be able to, as a woman, be able to navigate prejudice, unfairness, systemic difficulties. That would also be the true of racism, making sure. So I actually think that the school type doesn't do that, because that's inherently part of what we need to be doing with young people as they grow up. The challenges that young people face, we've seen through Everyone's Invited, why there may be a channel for that during the school. It's normally happening in the way they conduct their lives outside. It's the way that people parent. So the way that I've wanted to be dealing with preparation for life is to make sure, first, that the need to get ready for adult life does not mean that childhood is sacrificed or terminated early. Children need to be able to be children for as long as possible. So we need to be a bit of a cordon sanitaire against that. And the biggest preventative measure you can do is making sure that the online world doesn't invade them. And that's the really big challenge, which means you have to work with parents. So I spend an I challenge parents to come into schools so that I can talk to them about how they do their parenting. And my biggest plea to North London parents, some of whom are quite affluent and some of whom have big houses, is please can we think about how we run parties? Can we please be really, really clear that the thing that gives license to bad behavior or to predatory behavior or to behavior that gets in the way of childhood is allowing children to become prematurely moved into the adult world? And so children aged 13 and 14 should be gathering groups of no longer bigger than 6 or 8 in their parents' homes with the parents there. And this culture in London of allowing young people to engage in sexual activity and the use of alcohol or drugs as disinhibitors is one of the most dangerous things that gets in the way. And it's not because you're in a girls' school or a co-ed school you're going to deal with that. It's because parents understand and realise that and actually wake up to the fact that these are the dangers that you need to be dealing with. So you've got to be really good on where your children are spending their time, and you've got to be absolutely hot on what they're looking at from the moment you're unfortunate enough to give them a smart-enabled device. And that would say that that's almost more important than school choice. And if at the moment you're thinking about that, if that's the only thing you remember from this morning, that's what I'd want you to be doing. You know, TikTok is algorithmically driven to sell adverts to your children. They will go down things that you don't want them to do. There is a second voice, a third voice in children's lives. It used to be just teachers, just parents and friends. And there's another voice in there, and it's not a good one. And that's the thing that you notice I got a bit more passionate on a Saturday morning, that's the thing I feel most strongly about. And whether it's footling the difference between whether it's a single-sex school or a co-ed school. Jenny runs a fantastic school. It happens to be single-sex, and she makes it work brilliantly. I think I run a good co-ed school, but it's not brilliant because it's co-ed. It's brilliant because it's brilliant.
Thank you. Yes, in the black jumper.
Good morning. Thanks for allowing me a question. I've got a son who's still quite young, and he's in a state school, lovely primary state school. And I'm thinking forward about an independent school. But I've been slightly burned by the fact that there was a lovely head teacher, very forward-looking, but she's been in that school for like 30 years. And she retired, as it goes. And the new head teacher clearly is lovely, but clearly I've noticed already in a year a substantial change in the way the school is run. And when the gentleman said he's been at the school 20 years, I live in North London, so for me Highgate is high in the list. And so I'm somewhat concerned about how do I look at the school holistically without depending solely on the head teacher, and try not to be burned by the experience that I just lived, and the school kind of changing trajectory, which I couldn't afford that at the point of an independent school once you already changed your child's school and so on. What are your thoughts?
So I've only been there for 17 years, so the 20 years is a bit unfair. I'm 57. I'm reckoning I'm going to about 65, 66. It's given another 7 or 8 years. But there will be a point when I can no longer say that. So I think the thing about an independent, well, I can't comment on the way that the state school was run, but as, an independent school has a board of governors, and those governors are responsible for making the choice. And the culture of a school and the decision-making, the strategic decisions, very much sit with them. So they will have an idea of what they're looking for. And obviously they'll be looking for somebody different from me, because if I've been around for that long, they will need to be somebody different generation, a whole series of different experiences and so on. But I'm actually quite involved in helping governors find suitable candidates to be governors. I do that. I obviously I can't make the decisions because that'd be wrong, because I'll be choosing who my boss is. But I work quite hard to make sure that governors understand what it is about Highgate that makes Highgate. And I happen to believe, I mean, I've obviously just talked about something I feel passionately about, but I don't think any adult would disagree with. But I have various things I say about teaching and learning, which I wouldn't want to be changed. And that is that all exams have a distorting effect on the way you wish to teach and what you wish to teach. So you do not choose exams as your starting point. You have a vision for teaching. Scholarship is not for the particularly brainy. It is a way of working that means that young people feel they're setting an academic agenda. A head of department is meant to be visionary and is meant to be making decisions about the way we teach and what we wish to teach, and various other things. And they're sort of almost sacramental texts on which every governor has to put their hand and say, I believe, I understand, although I may interrogate. So I think you can be sure that what the governors after me will be looking for is somebody who will think in those terms. Now, it is conceivable that they will come up with different sacramental beliefs, but they will be coming from a point of philosophy on that. So yes, there will be changes, and it'll be so exciting. It'll be absolutely brilliant when somebody else comes in and everybody say, oh, for goodness sake, why didn't we see it? Oh, that's amazing. Finally, they're teaching sports science A-level. No, they won't. But it'll be really exciting. So I think it'll be just dynamic and wonderful and brilliant. And obviously, I will do the most successful handover imaginable. But I think there are, that's the way I would see it. So don't worry about it. Particularly, don't worry about things that you can't change. because it's going to happen. Even Jenny, who's probably much younger than me, will stop running her school, and yet it will be a brilliant school as it was before she took it over.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much for today. I've got a daughter, and you've mentioned earlier today that you need to, when you choose a school, you choose the right school for your child, and you look at their needs rather than your needs. And how do you choose the right school for them? How do you know, obviously through going to open days, like you've mentioned, knowing your child, like for example, if they're arty, sporty, but when you do go into the school, how do you not gauge, how do you gauge the right atmosphere, the environment, or how do you understand that this school is the right school for your child? That's what I'm trying to ask.
So how do you gauge that the school's right for your child? And I think that's because we've got two heads here who, you've got a 4+ intake, you've both got 7+ intakes, you've both got 11+ intakes. And I suppose what's the difference in terms of those decisions for a child who's 3 or 6 as opposed to a child who's 10 or perhaps 15 and looking at sixth form entry? How do you judge what's right?
I think the difference, just to answer that, the last bit first, would be around actually how much autonomy they have in terms of the decision making. I do think with a 16-year-old, it is again, or a 15-year-old, it really does need to be driven by them, and that, absolutely. But I think actually the similarities are more telling, and to answer that question, it's a good one, and I'm genuinely, it's a good one. You really want us to be granular about what it is when you go into a school that makes you think, got it. This really does feel like it could be a home an intellectual home for my daughter or son. And I think we do get quite quickly into kind of into sort of fairly inchoate territory. Like, it is about a gut feel. I really do think that. Of course, it's helpful to listen to the head, not just because you then know who the particular person leading the school is for a certain while, although I think that has a value, but probably more because they will be speaking, hopefully, about values that really are beyond themselves and about the culture and philosophy of the school. I absolutely love my job. And I will not be moving, by the way. I'm a little bit younger than Anne, but I absolutely won't be, only because I absolutely know that I am in the perfect place for me. And I've been in 6 amazing schools. I've been incredibly lucky over my career. And they all have had, as I say, I've really enjoyed it. But this is, by a long measure, for me, the most exceptional and the best fit. So I'm actually almost answering it by thinking, okay, what made it what was that? How do I know about fit? I think seeing whether people are happy around you actually really matters. Absolutely trying to make sure that your daughter or son at whatever age, how that they have access to the pupils there, and you can see what those interactions are like. You can watch really carefully how they're interacting with your pupil, with your son or daughter, hopefully, but also with each other. That really, I think, is very important. And get into I said earlier, get into the classroom, because, again, going back to Adam's point, scholarliness is not about a particular IQ, although, there may be a kind of Venn diagram with an overlap, but basically it is about, are those headlights on, and is that lesson full of excited people getting excited by the learning? And really almost so that the ideas in the room are slightly bigger than the people in it. They're on a mutual quest. And are you feeling that in some way? And even on a kind of drab Monday morning, whatever, if you can get a flavour of that. And if you've got that, and this isn't about selective or otherwise, it's about the level of engagement and the level of enthusiasm around learning. And those would be the kind of things that I would be sort of seeing as an absolute sort of starting point for whether this is going to be a fit, I think, as far as I was concerned.
Obviously, there's quite a lot we've said during the day, which I think help you can take in. So I'm trying to find something different to say. So what I'm saying is not necessarily the most important things. I think I can think of two additional things. One is get somebody you know well, who knows you, to ask them how they think you might make decisions generally. So get a bit of self-knowledge, because we're all very different. Some people will be choosing it on the basis of one particular provision or a sense of how sport works or something. Just get a sense. And if somebody tells you, look, you're just such a bad decision maker, we really need to prepare you for this, and I'll hold your hand. I think that's quite helpful, because I come across parents making decisions on the most extraordinary range of information, and also in really extraordinary ways. I mean, one father rang me up sort of like 1 minute before the deadline, said, I can't make up my mind between you and UCS. And I said, well, look, we've got 60 seconds to do this. You know everything about this school. He said, do you want me to toss a coin for you? He said, yes. Yeah, could you do that? And so I said, okay, heads UCS, tails Highgate. And I did it, and it came out UCS. He said, but that's not the answer I wanted. I said, well, you got it now. It's Highgate. I mean, it was just the nature of that. And secondly, I'd talk to parents and carers of children who were sort of like me and not like me, and ask them some questions about what it felt like for them, and ask them, tell me when it's really rubbish. Tell me about something that's gone wrong. And then try that out. And if that doesn't provide you with anything else, then you're going back to the old matrix of, of all the things we said earlier on. So I hope that's helpful. I think there was a question I did see somebody trying to ask a couple of times.
My question was, because the first question was about diversity, gender diversity. Mine is more actually about academic diversity. So, and what I mean by that is, so I was fortunate enough to go to an independent school, and I think when I think of my close friends, I think some of us are particularly creative and arty, some particularly rational and sciencey in doing that. And then when I look at my nephew who went to the same independent school, and I look at his group of friends, they seem much more similar almost. And so one of my worries is that independent schools aren't going to create a cookie cutter, let's call it templated 18-year-old versus the rich diversity of academia that there is and the different ways in which people want to learn.
Shall I go first? Yeah. Okay. It's a really good question. I think a lot of us really worry about the drive towards certain similar A-levels, because all the messages we're hearing are that the UK needs more of this or more of that, and the smart money is always in this, whatever. I'm a governor in 2 state sixth forms, and the number of people who want to be medics, engineers, lawyers, and nothing else, because for them it's about taking on a pathway which will have debt, and so they definitely want to pay back, and they want to know they're going to be able to help their families. And so trying to make sure that the employability opportunities for everybody are really well known. So we spend an enormous amount of time, to the point where we're ironized by our pupils of saying, so do what you love and what you're good at. Do not choose A-levels on the basis of where you think you want to go, because if you choose the A-levels you love doing, then you're more likely to find a career. So we know we have to work harder on humanities, particularly for boys. We know we need to work hard on the creative arts generally. We know we have to meet parents who say, art, GCSE, really? Shouldn't history be better because you learn to write essays? And so we go through all of that and talk about the non-artistic benefits of doing art, GCSE, and so on, to the point where I think my parents now understand that they're asking the wrong questions if they're saying, are there any smart choices in terms of subject? I don't think it's schools at all. I think it's society, but understanding that it's a societal thing that's coming through, and parents are basically saying, how do I ensure that my child is happy and successful in the future? There must be some smart choices. It's quite difficult to turn around and say, yes, they are, but you need to think about what your child loves doing and what they're good at. So I think there is an opportunity for diversity. That's why we run a 4 A-level program in the sixth form, to make sure that people have got more likely to have a complementary subject, because you can get to university to read a wider range of subjects, even on the back of a 1 A-level, which is different from the other 3. And we're finding that works. I don't think we're unique at all in doing that, though, however.
Yeah, I think, as Adam said, it's all about making space for the individual. So you're making space. So, yes, that schools may or may not be academically selective. And that is going to make one, if you like, constraint. But within that, the thing above all that you want to do is make sure that every human can find what they love, not what necessarily their parents love, or as Adam said, some kind of societal pressure might want them to be, but what they really love doing, and they have the space and they have the resources to do it, and that they have the confidence to do it. I think, I think, again, if there's something that, you all will want to come I suspect, out of this significant investment, it is that absolute sense of confidence. So when you were saying they might be a little bit cookie cutter, your nephews, so I was thinking, well, maybe that's the one thing that you really could put your finger on and say, yeah, actually, that is going to come out, that there may be greater, I hope, anyway, social, emotional, and intellectual confidence coming out of the other end. But I genuinely do think that actually what schools like ours are absolutely about, but have to really prove that they're about, is making space and doing daring things with the curriculum, like perhaps, because I think, above all, I think, again, yes, our exam curriculums just don't help. Don't help us help individuals find space. So thinking about cutting down, for instance, numbers of GCSEs, which a number of really, really excellent schools are doing, both London day schools and actually lots of boarding schools, to make space for people to do all sorts of different things and find different ways of expressing their learning and different paces of doing it. And yeah, not just looking at exams or exam outcomes.
I'm afraid we're completely out of time now for questions, but the three experts we've got here and also a whole room full of other experts are downstairs, and I know we'll be very, very happy to answer your questions one-to-one if you want to come and find them afterwards. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you so much to the three of you for sharing your expertise with us. You've got lots of food for thought now, so go away, have lots of interesting conversations today, do your homework, and good luck with it all. And as I say, come find any of us if there's anything you want to follow up on. All right, thank you.